following is a presentation of the Fellowship Church at Anthem, a community of faith, love, and hope. For more information, please visit fellowshipanthem.com.
Great job, guys. Thanks for setting us up today. That really was a perfect song. In fact, you think about perfect songs, and if you have a song where you have the concepts in the song, the gospel, Elvis, catfish. You know, I grew up in the South, so that's a perfect song for me. And besides all that, I'm Elvis's cousin. I don't know if you guys knew that or not, but you really only get to see it when I bust out my dance moves. So that'll be later on in the service, much later on in the service. When I think of the word perfect, I think of a couple things. I think of a perfect cup of coffee. This is not a perfect cup of coffee, but it's good. It's a good cup of coffee. It's not perfect, but it is good. A couple times this week, we had what I would call the perfect Arizona sunset. I got a couple texts from several of you. I texted a couple of you and said, be sure you check it out. It was one night, I think it might have been Friday night, when I was standing out there, and it was the night, like the whole sky, it was like, I texted somebody, crazy sunset, because it was just perfect. Perfect sunset. There's some words we, use perfect to describe that we don't really mean perfect, we just mean pretty darn good, right? Like if your daughter comes home and says, Dad, I met the perfect boy. Well, you know that's not true, because there is no such thing. And you also then recognize that there's no perfect judgment in the mind of your daughter when she says that. Some of you walked into your house here in Anthem for the very first time, and you walked in and you looked around and you said, oh, this house is perfect for our family. And now that you've lived in it a while, you recognize that it might not be quite as perfect as you originally thought. It's funny the way we use the term perfect, isn't it? We talk about a perfect baseball game, and while there's one element of the game that ends up being perfect by the metrics that we use to determine baseball games' perfection, there are other elements of the game. In fact, we have a whole category in baseball that we call errors. You can have a perfect game on one side of the ledger, and on the other side of the ledger have errors in the perfect game. So perfection, even as we define it in athletics, is often sort of nuanced. Sometimes we see perfection in nature, in creation. We look at a rose or a flower, we go, man, that is a perfect rose. It's got the right balance. The petals are all opened up. They're all smiling at you. I mean, it's just, there's perfection in nature. Perfect. Some of us believed in the early days of life that when we were holding this little child that we had in our hands the perfect child. Now we know better. Something happened to perfection, didn't it? I have in my house and in my head, I make really what is, it can only be described as the perfect roasted tomatillo salsa. It's perfect. I perfected it. Took a little of this out, pushed a little of that aside, threw some of this in. It's perfect now. It's perfect. Last week, you saw me on the video, I figured out the perfect key lime pie. It's perfect. Can't be done any better. Perfection. It's interesting how we define things as perfect, isn't it? Some of us think of ourselves as perfectionists. Perfectionist. I'm a perfectionist. Some of us think we are perfectionists, and we actually like it when people refer to us that way. It's like a badge of honor. Oh, you're a perfectionist, aren't you? And we kind of giggle, like, yeah, I am. But what they really might mean by that is, golly, you are hard to get along with. But we wear it like a badge of honor. It's like, yeah, I pretty much do everything right all the time. and we know better, and the complimenter knows better, but it still lands with us like it's something to be worn with pride because our culture values things that are at least in the illusion of perfection. Sometimes our jobs demand perfection, at least a high level of it, right? I mean, I don't want a brain surgeon who gets it right 9 out of 10 times working on me. I want the 10 out of 10 guy, right? But perfectionism is interesting when it begins to show up in our lives as a way of living. And a lot of us probably in this community this morning and in the community that we live in, we would, if we were really honest, we would say we try to pursue perfection. And we would put ourselves along some gradient of perfectionist. In most of our lives, there's some element where we would say, I'm a perfectionist here. And it may be in an area of our strength, or it could be in an area of a glaring weakness. We're trying to overcompensate in a particular area. And so we push hard to achieve a high standard of excellence. Perfectionism is not the same thing as striving to do your best, right? I mean, striving to do your best is about a healthy advancement of my life. It's about healthy growth in me. Whereas perfectionism is this illusion. It's this false belief that if I live perfect and if I look perfect and if I act perfect, I can avoid the pain that comes with judgment and blame and shame. And the reality is it's not achievable. Perfectionism is not achievable. And at its core, perfectionism is about me trying to earn someone's approval in such a way that it changes my behavior or it changes my thought processes. And it sometimes changes them in such dramatic ways to try to earn that approval that it ends up making me someone that I'm really not. I'll do things or say things or act in certain ways or dress in certain manners or whatever to try to create the illusion that I am perfect and you should approve me for who I think I am. So when we come to this thing of perfectionists and perfectionism, a lot of us, we are that today because we were raised in a high-performance environment. We were praised when we did well. We were praised when we got good grades, or we were praised when we did good in school, or we were praised when we dressed right, when we looked right. And that praise sort of fueled something in us that said, hey, I can gain people's approval around me, significant people, my parents or my mentors or my teachers, my leaders. I can gain their approval by preforming or acting a certain way. But it really is an illusion because there's no such thing as perfection. We think about perfectionist and we think about perfectionism. It really is about this performance-based living that's very thin on the surface because when you peel away the performance, right behind it, there's a person living there that's cracked and flawed and broken, wounded. And it's so interesting when we can peel away the layer of perfectionism and the true person comes out. There's a part of us that craves that. There's a part of us that celebrates. It's like, finally, something authentic, something true, something real. And yet it's so hard for us to move into that space, isn't it? Healthy growth and healthy striving is really about me. It's when I say, hey, how can I be better? How can I improve? And yet perfectionism is really others focused. It's about what will those people think of me. It's a big difference between healthy growth and perfectionism. They're two different sides of very different coins. I don't know if this has ever played out in your house or not. It depends on how much of a perfectionist you are with your house environment. But I know in my house, sometimes I'll get a call from someone and they'll be like, hey, we're gonna swing by for just a minute. We just want to swing by. And I'm like, all right, great. Love to have you. Come on by. Click. Oh my God, honey. Kids, alert. Pick up anything that's on the floor. Someone, quick, wash all the dishes. You know, I mean, there's like this mad scramble through the house, right? Picking stuff up, jamming stuff under the couch cushions. I mean, it's just crazy, isn't it? And the reason you're laughing is because you've done it too. Isn't that funny? The reason you're laughing is because you have done it too. We've all done it. And we all pretend like we don't do it. I know there's a couple of you that your house has never been out of order, but we have good therapists for that. Yeah, see? Let's get those cards out right now. All right. You know, and maybe you've experienced this. If you've lived a long time in high states of perfectionism, you probably have dealt with some form of the downside of that. And it can range from anything from depression to addictions to anxiety to even just sometimes just getting stuck. You know, where fear grips us so much that we can't move forward with anything because we're afraid it won't be good enough. It won't be perfect. And so we just don't do anything. We lock down. And this idea of perfectionism is such a pervasive thing in our culture today. And there's so much of our culture that hinges on a performance-based metric that we start incorporating it into our lives, into our relationships. And the next thing you know, it's really all about, you know, well, I'm going to love you, or I'm going to be in connection to you, or I'm going to be in a relationship to you as long as. And then we got our measuring like sticks and our scorecards, and it's tit for tat. You do this, I'm going to do this. And if you don't do that, I'm not doing this. The next thing you know, we got this completely out of balance relationship that's all based on performance, and we get ourselves in a lot of trouble. And if we look into the scriptures and we see Jesus, he's got a lot of things to say about perfectionism, because he dealt with it on the religious level, and we still even today we deal with it on the religious level. There's the illusion of perfection as it relates to how we perform in terms of our faith practice. There's an illusion that we've got it all figured out, that our life is all together, that we're walking the line, we're towing the mark, we got it all figured out. And the most religious appearing people are sometimes those who have the highest degree of dysfunction right behind the veneer of perfection. Jesus dealt with this in a kind of a harsh way, actually, and this is one of the reasons why I really believe that in the new heavens and the new earth that there will be periodic shows comedy shows that Jesus will do. He'll be the stand-up comedian, because some of his teaching is so tongue-in-cheek, sort of cynical, and it's so cutting. There's two examples of it in the Scripture that are really funny to me, and I think Jesus is addressing a group of religious leaders, and you can tell these guys, and I use the term guys intentionally because they didn't allow women to be religious leaders in Jesus' day, and that's really unfortunate. It was just part of the cultural nuance of the time. And but you have these guys that are religious leaders, and they dress like they are. I mean, everything about them looks good on the outside. And it's all about public appearance. It's all about the pretense of rightness. Right? I mean, that's at the core of perfectionism. I'm right. This is the right way to do that. It's the right way to think, right way to dress, right way to look, right way to act, right way to be. I'm right. I'm the most right. And so you have these religious leaders, and they would line themselves up almost like a choir, like a religious gauntlet. And they'd be dressed in these long flowing robes, and they would have long beards and some kind of a headpiece, and it would be colorful and bright and ornate, and there was no question when you walked into the room. There was no question who the religious leaders were. You could point them out. Oh, there's the religious leader. But their appearance and their verbiage betrayed who they really were. Because who they were on the inside was this pretend version of rightness. And so, in the Old Testament, we have the Ten Commandments. Right? Those are the laws that God gave to Moses on the mountain. He wrote them down on these 10 commandments, and Moses brought them down, and those were the rules that the people had to live by. And as time moved forward, and as religion often does, it's like, these are 10 pretty good rules, but we're pretty smart people. We could probably make them better. Don't you love it when we say that to God? Hey, God, you did a pretty good job, but I can do better. And so they took the 10 Commandments and they sort of embellished them and expanded them. And by the time Jesus comes along, you've got about 700 or 800 different individual specific commands about how to live in a way that God would approve you. If you keep all these commands, God's going to like you more. You're going to get a better corner in the new heaven, and you're going to get more gold to walk on, and your life will be better. So these guys lined up at the front of the room, they would be like, we do have it all figured out. We keep all the rules. And everybody in the room, Jesus included, would have been kind of snickering. They'd have been like, of course you do. Because everybody knew they didn't, including them. And so Jesus calls them out on them in one particular conversation. And he uses such great humor to do it. It's like, you're a joke. You're a joke. You take all of these rules, and what you end up doing is you take the little bitty minutia rules and you keep them, but the big things, the things that really matter, you totally disregard them. And this is the metaphor that he used. He said, you guys will strain, you'll cough up a gnat. And you know exactly what Jesus is talking about if you've ever ridden a motorcycle. Or driven with your head out the window like your dog. Now, more than likely, these Pharisees, these religious leaders, had never ridden a motorcycle. More than likely. But they knew exactly what he was talking about, because Jesus said, you know what? You know how, like, if you're riding along in a motorcycle and you get a bug in your mouth? Or you're, just say you're sitting outside and all of a sudden a fly comes and bam, hits you right in the mouth. And the next thing you know, right? You can't get it up. Just a little bitty thing. You can't get it up. And so Jesus says, here's what you're like. You choke over these little gnat that flies in your mouth, but yet you swallow a camel. Now, everybody at this point would have been just belly laughing. Because this is hilarious, right? This is Jesus the comedian. You're coughing at a little bitty gnat, but you're choking over a two-humped camel? What's wrong with you people? And what he's illustrating is that there's really no such thing as perfection. What happens is that we get these blind spots where we can't see our behavior. And we think we're doing awesome because we got all this in line over here. But over here in this part of our life, it's a train wreck. So how do we deal with perfectionism? How do we come up against it? And one of the other stories that Jesus used, again, similar, there's this unique sort of dialogue that he's got going on. He's like, hey, you know what it's like when you get like a little piece of dust in your eye, and you know how it can just irritate your eye like crazy, and you keep working it till you finally get it out. He said, well, you guys are like that. He's like, there's a little bit of speck of dust in your eye, and you'll work it until you get it out, but you can't see that you've got like this huge timber, this beam coming out of your other eye. And that's what happens to us when we get into perfectionism and we become perfectionists. We live in the illusion that everything is good, and it's not. We may have one part of our life dialed in, but the rest of our life, it's just completely out of control. And what I want to talk to you today about for just a couple minutes is how do we deal with the part when we sort of wake up to the reality that I might be a perfectionist over here, but the rest of my life, it's all jacked up. How do we deal with that reality? There's some ways we often try to deal with it, and one of the ways we try to deal with it is we just ignore this part. We just, like, it doesn't exist. Look at this part. Or we cover it up, it's like, don't look over here, right? But Check this out over here. And those are not legitimate. What if in keeping with this whole series of dealing with our shame, what if we just began to acknowledge it? What if, we said, hey, check out this part of my life. I got this dialed in. You want to know how to do this? I can really help you do that. Check this out. But oh, by the way, while you're checking out the stuff I got dialed in, I also got some stuff over here that just doesn't work very well. So if you want to know me, don't just look at this. This will make you smile, but look at this. Is this part of my life? Well, this is poo over here. So how do we deal with that? There's a couple ways that I think we come to really experience our brokenness in a healthy manner. And the first one is really about self-kindness. It's about learning just to be kind to ourselves. If you've ever taken the opportunity to listen to what you say to yourself, especially in a moment of failure, in a moment of weakness, in a moment when life sort of crashes down and you stub your toe and you recognize your own limitations, what's the tape that plays in your head? If you're a perfectionist today, if that sort of like characterizes you, there's probably a tape that plays in your head that says something like this. Every time you stub your toe, it's like, you idiot. You are so incompetent. I can't believe you would do that. You're smarter than that. Why did you do that? Why did you act like that? I can't believe you think like that. And who knows where the tape came from? It might have come from somebody, older than you earlier in your life, but that tape that plays in your head is part of what pushes you for perfection in life, but ultimately isn't achievable. And in the moments when you stub your toe, the last thing that's on your mind is, hey, just be kind to yourself. Just be kind to yourself. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to be kind to other people when they fail, and how hard it is to be kind on yourself? What if we just practice the same sort of kindness with ourselves that we practice with others when we see them stumble and fall? I mean, for some of us, when we see somebody fail or fall, compassion comes out. It's like a default response. It's like, hey, I hurt with you. But when we stumble and fall, we go, hey, I hate you. It's a form of self-hatred. And what we're saying is that in a healthy version of our lives, there's light and there's darkness. There's good works and there's mistakes and failures. And somewhere in the middle of all that, we exist, and we have to learn to be kind to ourselves. That doesn't mean we just excuse it. We go, oh, messed up there. Oh, well. Still love me. It doesn't work quite like that. We have to be warm, and we have to be forgiving towards ourselves rather than self-flagellating, and rather than self-criticizing. And at the same time, we have to acknowledge, you know what? I'm not going to do that again. It doesn't work for me. I got to do better. I got to do something different. I have this rule that I've been trying to work on in my own life, because I do have areas of my life where perfectionism is just, it sort of jumps up and bites me sometimes. I remember one time I asked Peg to pick me up some cilantro at the grocery store because I was going to make the world's best roasted tomatillo salsa. And she, this is a common mistake, but she came home accidentally with parsley. That's like number 11 on the Ten Commandments, like number 11. Don't substitute. You can't substitute parsley for cilantro. It doesn't work. And I remember, we still laugh about it now. I think maybe I laugh about it, and she still doesn't laugh about it. But she reminds me every now and then, oh, parsley? Because I got just blew over an herb. So I kind of have this rule that I've been working on. I'm fortunate enough to have one of my two grandmothers still living. And she's in her 90s now, and I got to spend a lot of time around my grandparents growing up, which I'm very thankful for today. But my grandma, both of my grandmothers were just great women, great investors in my life. And one of the things that I would never do is speak unkindly to my grandmothers. One, I knew that if I did, they would get a switch after me. If you don't know what a switch is, it's right out there on that tree. But two, there was, and probably more importantly for me, there's a respect for my grandma. This really high honor for her, both of them. And I wouldn't speak unkindly to them at all. Never, ever. And sometimes they were stern, and sometimes they were strict, and sometimes they made me toe the line, and yet I would never speak unkindly to them. And so I've just tried to start living by this rule. Hey, Ted, talk to yourself like you talk to your grandma. And it helps me think about the way I need to treat myself with honor and with respect, even when I'm looking at my dark side, even when I'm looking at my failure. I still step up and go, you know what? Be kind to yourself. One of the other elements that helps me deal with my perfectionism at times is recognizing the commonness of humanity. We're all in the same boat. This was Jesus' big beef with the Pharisees, right? It's like, you guys have got this part of your life dialed in. You can't see that you got this massive failure, and that this massive failure in your life is common to all human beings. So stop pretending. And when I stumble, when I trip and fall, when I go through moments of failure, I have to stop and recognize, you know what? This is part of the human experience. The non-failing, the non-stumbling, the non-tripping, the non-mistakes, the non-sin, that's reserved for the afterlife. But I'm not there yet. So until then, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to trip. I'm going to stumble. I'm going to have failures. And that the feelings that I have of inadequacy and the feelings that I have of pain and the emotion associated with making a mistake and failing, those are common to humanity. I'm not the only one that feels that. Some of you right now, while I'm talking about this, there's something in you that's going, gosh, I'm so glad he's talking about this. So I thought I was the only one dealing with these horrible emotions of failure every time I make a mistake. You're not. You're not. All of us do. All of us do. Even the perfectionist that pretends like they never fail, they actually deal with it more commonly. So don't, when you trip or when you stumble and fall, don't isolate yourself. Don't let the tape run. You're such an idiot. I can't believe you would do this. Just acknowledge this is part of what it means to be human. Don't go to the victim mode and don't become a victim of others, or worse, a victim of ourselves. Just acknowledge it. You know what? Made a mistake. And it's common to humanity. One final thing about dealing with perfectionism in our lives. And this one is, it's a little bit trickier because it's not something we do, it's something we have to be real intentional about doing, and it's called being mindful. Being mindful of what's going on inside of you at the same time you're mindful of what's happening outside of you. And what often will happen with us when we fail, at a moment of failure, our emotions will become so much in charge of our lives. We'll do one of two things. We'll overcompensate for them by acting like they don't exist. It's like, I don't feel that. And the challenge that represents, as we all probably, I think we would all know, is you can't heal what you can't feel. So you have to embrace it. Oh, geez, that makes me feel bad. Oh, geez, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Just acknowledge it. Acknowledge the feelings of failure. Just acknowledge it. But the other extreme we often go to is we over-exaggerate it. You can't do that either. You can't blow it out of proportion. It's like what we end up doing sometimes is it's like we tell ourselves a rumor. You know how rumors, like, they start right here with like a kernel of truth, and then all of a sudden someone tells someone else, and it's like, that doesn't seem quite severe enough. I think I'll add something to it. And we embellish it. And then that person tells someone else, and they're like, oh, that didn't seem quite big enough. They didn't, like, gasp. I wanted them to gasp. I think I'll embellish it. And little by little, this rumor develops and grows over time. You know, hey, did you hear what happened the other day down at the... No, what? Right? And there's something in us that wants the drama. We crave the drama, and yet if we really, once we hear the story, it may or may not be true, and there might be a kernel of truth, but there might be a whole lot of fluff to it, right? I mean, just the other day, I don't know if you guys heard this or not, but we have a bowling alley coming. I made that up. That rumor has been floating around Anthem since the day I moved in here 12 years ago. There's the bowling alley right there. We're putting it in that tin, that thing. It's just one lane, but it's going to be really, really good. That's the way a rumor, it just grows, right? We exaggerate it. And sometimes we do that with ourselves. We're like, golly, this mistake that I just made, it's fatal. I'm done. We're over. Can't survive, can't function, can't move forward. It's done. And we blow it completely out of proportion. So part of overcoming the perfectionistic tendency in us is to not exaggerate it, but to deal with it in reality. Yeah, that was a mistake, and yeah, that hurt, and yeah, I'm dealing with some negative emotions, but keep them in check. Don't over-identify with those feelings. Otherwise, we get swept away with our negativity. So mindfulness is when I actually pause and go, okay, hang on, what am I really thinking about right now? What am I feeling right now? Well, let me wrap up today by just talking about this, because I know this is an issue that affects all of us at some level, and some of us at big levels. Perfectionism. It can be like something that really does need to be treated therapeutically, and it can come in waves. And some of us live with perfectionists, and we wish they would just ease up a little bit. But perfectionism never happens in a vacuum. If you're a perfectionist today, recognize that the people living in your environment, whether they're your kids, or your spouse, or your coworkers, they're all being affected by your perfectionism. And what's particularly painful is that those of us that are perfectionists in certain areas of our life, we probably got it by growing up under the stern hand of a perfectionist. So if you're living out that life of perfectionism, you're probably going to pass that on to those precious things that we call our kids. So be careful. And here's what's beautiful about compassion. Compassion is also contagious. So if our kids see us trip and stumble and fall and get up and forgive ourselves and practice compassion with ourselves, that's what they learn how to do too. Doesn't mean we can't hold a high standard. Doesn't mean we can't strive for growth, and it doesn't mean we can't achieve. But what it means is when we don't achieve, when we stumble and trip, when we fail, we get right back up and we forgive ourselves and we practice compassion with ourselves and we move forward. That's what I want my kids to learn. Some of the hardest things I think that we ever do as parents is learn to just tell our kids, oh, you know what? I really messed that up. I'm sorry. I apologize. I think one of the things that would really benefit our kids is if they heard their parents apologize to each other. Last week, honey, I was really mad at you when you brought home that damn parsley, and I apologize for it. I recognize I got real upset over that parsley, and I apologize. And our kids are sitting there, and they're going, apparently my parents are human. I knew it. Now they know it. The world is a better place. Leonard Cohen has a song called Anthem, and in the song the lyrics say that there's a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. It's true in our lives too. All of us are cracked. We all have brokenness. We all have places, wounds where we failed. And if we just acknowledge it, if we embrace it, even the pain of it, if we parade it in front of people in a healthy way, now we've given the light a chance to actually shine in and illuminate something inside of us. Here's our mantra for the week. There's no such thing as perfect people. Comma, that includes me. It's a great mantra for us. It would help a lot of us overcome the pain of perfectionism and the illusion that keeps us in a prison of performance.